why did you choose to be a non-party communist?
Well, that is later on. In a part, it is due to, it was in India. I came to India '58, and I began to see things differently. Of course, I'd seen that the thing was not only the developments inside the Soviet Union. That was one part of it. I had been in Turkmenistan several times, and there was a change in Turkmenistan, a change inside the Soviet Union. And then there was the policies of Soviet Union and the policies of the big Western communist parties. They were very strong. They were in reality against the Third World, and I corresponded with the party chairman, my old friend, about these questions. So you could say it was two things: the negative developments inside the Soviet Union, chauvinism, Russian chauvinism, a lot of things, and the general line of for instance, the French party not really supporting Algerian independence, etc. But I did not become a renegade. This is very clear, and I still have many friends who took C. Hermansson, the old party chairman, and others who took a different line.
So the party disappeared, but you remained.
In one way, you could say. By leaving the party, I kept on in the party. That's to say, I kept to the central ideas of the central political questions, while the party sort of dissolved. And today it's the left party, and its main plank is feminism. Well, that might be interesting, but it's not a communist party.
And what was your experience visiting China?
In 1952, during the Korean War. And Sweden was one of the few countries having diplomatic relations with China. Then the Chinese sent out, which was politically important, a cultural troupe, performing arts, all these Chinese acrobatics, etc. And so I worked with them, delegated to them, worked with them for 2 months, traveling around in Sweden, doing a lot of work and getting to know these Chinese friends very, very closely. If we live together, work together, travel together, eat together, well, you get to know them, and that was rather important for me personally. Also, I liked them, and I wrote about their way of working. They were extremely competent.
You visited Mao.
I met Mao twice, but that does not mean I know. We exchanged some words and discussions. But I mean, if I had met Mao in 1936 in Denna, he would have been able to talk directly. But when I met him, first time I met him was in 62. Was it? Then the situation was different. He could just we just had to exchange of words. I've been in Liulin in the countryside, and he said, "Well, if you're interested in Chinese agriculture, that would not be the best place to go. It's an arid, economically backward." But I said, "Well, for the revolution, it's an early liberated era." I said, "Oh yes, that." But I mean, that was just. But he was laughing. He was. But I didn't know. Zhou Enlai I had spoken to a little bit more, but I can't say I knew any of them. Now, I might say I had a more personal relation with Nehru, not very much, but still I could say I had talked and discussed with Nehru.
And what was your experience visiting China during the Cultural Revolution?
Of course, I was for the Cultural Revolution. Mainly it's depicted in the West as a struggle among different student groups in Beijing. That was not the interesting thing. I was in the countryside. I was in a village, a commune called Liulin, outside of Yan'an, and I saw great changes. I mean, you have changes in the health service, changes in the education, and also the political changes. Of course, they were quoting. You had the meeting where they were deciding the harvest, etc. And they were quoting out of the little red book, but they were. It was an honest discussion. I mean, I experienced a cultural revolution in the countryside, and I also know that. It's a great positive example.
Oh.
We could go on at length, but that was and of course, I would say the Chinese today, the official Chinese, would not agree, but on the other hand, they haven't. They did give me a couple of years ago an honorary degree for the sociological work in the report from a Chinese village. So they understand my view, or they know that I have this view, but I'm not an enemy.
Do you support that policy that time of sending the students, the professors, the educated ones to the countryside and to the factories?
I do, and it's a very simple reason. In China, as in here in India, the difference. There is a 1,000-year difference between the educated, more or less, elite and the people. If you scratch me, of course, you come to a poor farmer within 2 generations. So the village is not different. If you scratch the normal Chinese intellectual or the Indian intellectual here, you can find it's a long road. So I think that was very necessary. They had to know the China they were talking about. They had to get to know the poverty, the reality, because the Chinese villages were poor. I mean, they were like the Indian villages. Whereas the development in Beijing or Shanghai could be as well in Calcutta for the intellectuals. So that I think was necessary. They had to know the country, and also, honestly, much of the different Red Guard divisions in the cities, they got into international struggle of a kind which was not conducive to the revolution. It was better that they went out, got to know the country, and also worked with their hands.
So, from this question, may I ask you that in our Indian context, we also need that to eradicate our caste system or the things like that?
In the Indian country, I would say something which you might not have thought about. You know, Gandhi, his volunteers, he had his volunteers to clean latrines. Mao had his followers to carry night soil. And in that case, they wanted both to, what you could say, break caste, get also emotional feeling. I think these things, are necessary also in Europe for many intellectuals.
My next question is regarding your visit to Cuba.
We want to make a film for the working for the Swedish television, but we worked on our own, but we are selling it to the Swedish country, about what we call the helpers, the aid racket, and we had to work in a third world country, and the only ones who would accept us, most of them didn't like the idea, and we made a rather funny, rather interesting film, and with the help of the Cuban Institute for Cinematography. It was a good film. I think it was not a bad film, rather. But my experience, of course, at that time, they had difficulties, and they were, of course, discussing very much which road to take. That was in '67, and I know that they were at loggerheads a little bit with the Chinese, because the Chinese seem to have warned them very much against the one-crop economy and the dangers of monoculture. But my experience was, I liked Cuba. It was materially, it was a difficult period for them.